Coming up next on Pennsylvania Newsmakers, the Pennsylvania state budget stalemate is now approaching 3 months. We'll get the latest from the Capitol with longtime AP reporter Marc Levy. But first, how can Pennsylvania best manage pressing energy, data center, and artificial intelligence? We'll talk with the leader of Team Pennsylvania about a new roadmap she believes best positions the Commonwealth to be a powerhouse for 21st century innovation. That's all coming up next on Pennsylvania Newsmakers.
Welcome to the fast-paced and unrehearsed weekly discussion featuring the leaders who help shape your world. Join us as we address the issues that impact you each and every day. This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers. And now, here's your host.
Hello, I'm Steve Aaron, this week's guest host on Pennsylvania Newsmakers. The converging forces of energy transformation, data centers, and artificial intelligence represent both an urgent challenge, but also an extraordinary opportunity for Pennsylvania. That's the position of Team Pennsylvania, which has just released a new roadmap designed to ensure that Pennsylvania solidifies its position and doesn't fall behind other states. We are delighted to welcome back to Pennsylvania Newsmakers, Abby Smith, the president and CEO of Team Pennsylvania. Hi, Abby.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Great to have you back. Why does Pennsylvania need a roadmap for energy, data centers, and AI, and why now?
We felt like everybody's kind of talking about data centers, talking about energy, talking about AI constantly. It's the center square of everybody's bingo board, and yet they were happening separately. Everybody's having separate conversations about these topics, yet they're really interconnected. And the other thing is everybody's having very binary conversations. We like them, we don't like them. We want them, we don't want them. And I think it's just much more complicated than that, as most situations are. And so what we wanted to do was bring these topics together and really say, what do we actually want for Pennsylvania? What do we want that 10-year horizon to look like? And then what do we have to do in the near term and the medium term and the long term to get there? And rather than starting in this kind of reactive, do we like this project or not like this project, that we can instead have a much more holistic conversation about what we really want to see and then how do we get there.
How is Team Pennsylvania positioned in your mind to kind of lead these discussions? I think for people who aren't familiar with what you do and how you approach issues, why do you think your organization is positioned to bring all these constituents together?
I am glad you asked, because I think that we, as a nonpartisan organization and a statewide organization, we're really looking at the whole of the Commonwealth, and we're focused on Pennsylvania's economy specifically. So we're not thinking about it from one particular project. We're not thinking about it from one particular political party angle. We're really thinking what makes sense for Pennsylvania's economy in the long term. And because of that, we can be a real neutral broker for this kind of information. We feel like it's not about really taking sides. It's about understanding what are the key things we need to contend with. And then how do we move toward that? How do we move away from that? What do we need to do to make sure that we're well positioned for that economic growth opportunity? When you have something come out under one particular political party or another, you run the risk that a whole bunch of people, 50% plus or minus a little, right, say, well, that one's not for me. That plan is not for me. That approach is not for me. So I think we saw it as an important leadership role that we needed to play. And we play this on a number of topics, but things that are really going to drive economic growth, we think require a neutral broker and neutral leader and convener to bring a lot of different voices and partners to the table. And that's what we did. We had about 90 plus organizations participate in the building of this roadmap. And, if anyone's ever participated in a group project, it is not an easy thing to get input from that many voices, but that's one of the key roles that we play. And they didn't agree with each other around the table. But I think that's part of what's important, to lay it all out there and understand where do we need to go, where are we coming from, and agree on what we want to see for Pennsylvania. That's actually a stronger starting point for alignment.
And where have you come down as far as support from the Shapiro administration, from federal leaders in the Senate? It sounds like you've got some broad support on both sides of the aisle.
We do. When we issued this press release, we were really excited about the fact that both the Shapiro administration, Senator McCormick, representing very different, not just political parties, but very different places in this particular moment. Things are really partisan in a lot of the conversations we're having, and you rarely find them quoted in the same press release. release. But I think it speaks to the fact that what we're really looking at is what we want to see for Pennsylvania. And that's something that actually everybody can find what their voice is in that conversation. And so we're really proud of the fact that this is truly nonpartisan work. This isn't looked at through one particular political party's lens or another. And I think both Senator McCormick and Governor Shapiro are looking to see Pennsylvania's leadership in energy and in innovation come to fruition. That what we have right now, we can't take for granted. The future that we have is something that we have to continue to plan for. And so while they may disagree on exactly the path to get there or what investments we see and where, what they want to see is economic growth and vitality. And what they want to see is Pennsylvania's continued leadership in both energy and in innovation.
So I'd like to take a deeper dive into the roadmap itself. We're going to take a quick break and we'll continue our conversation with Abby Smith right after this.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business, and by the Pennsylvania State Education Association, bringing the power of a great education to our schools, our students, and our communities. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Please visit pahighwayinfo.org. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
Continuing our conversation with Abby Smith, the president and CEO of Team Pennsylvania. So we've talked about this roadmap for energy, data centers, and AI. Let's take a deeper dive. What are you hoping to accomplish with this roadmap? What is the vision?
If you want to picture a Venn diagram between those three, this isn't just about how do we have the energy to power a particular data center project or not. This is really about how we're ultimately not just powering then AI and supercompute power to do all kinds of things in our society, which we hear a lot about, but then how are we also using AI to solve for the problems around energy transition, thinking about the growing needs and demands that we have, and then thinking about not just the build out of individual projects, but broadly speaking, how AI transforms other aspects of our economy as well. So what we're really hoping is that in this 10-year horizon, Pennsylvania can be a leader in how we've adopted AI to address energy transition. We think that the problems we need to solve for within energy, how we're going to meet future demand, depend heavily on how we actually adopt AI within energy as a sector, and it's ripe for transformation. We also want to see modernization of our grid. This is something that we need to figure out no matter what. And so knowing that Pennsylvania is such a huge net exporter of energy and that we provide energy for the surrounding region, we want to make sure that we're taking a leadership role in how we make that transition happen. We're also really thoughtful about the role that, in particular, our small and medium-sized manufacturers can potentially play in meeting the supply chain needs as we build out this kind of infrastructure. And we think their ability to meet that demand depends on how AI is adopted. And so you can see these things are all kind of interconnected. And we are trying to take that long-term vision. Where do we want to go? How do we get there? And understanding that sometimes the hardest thing is to figure out how do you take those first few steps. But that part of it is you have to kind of agree what is going to be the long-term play for Pennsylvania. And we think that we have all of the basic ingredients and components to be a leader in how we actually adopt AI. It is no longer the case that technology can just kind of live in our urban centers or live in Silicon Valley. This is the kind of thing where we have the actual problems that AI is designed to solve for and technology is designed to solve for. So making sure that AI is actually coming into our communities, our businesses, small manufacturers, farms, factories, across the board. This is something that we think Pennsylvania can play a leadership role in, that we can be a real innovation corridor in America.
For Pennsylvanians who maybe are a little skeptical or who are concerned about the energy impact of these data centers, impacts on water, other issues like that, how can they stay involved in what you're doing? Is there an opportunity for them to learn about your roadmap and how they could participate in this?
Definitely. And the roadmap is really designed for policymakers, business leaders, and local decision makers play a really big role in whether or not and how projects come to fruition. I think right now, what we see is that a project kind of just gets announced within a community. And I think that local decision makers find that they're ill-equipped to really set their communities up for success. And we see this across the board. And I think this leads to everybody kind of feeling like they take this kind of stance where they're on their heels and they go to their respective corners. And I think what we'd really like to see is that instead local decision makers feel well equipped to set a table to make sure that community benefit agreements are built in so that you're considering not just how a community has a project exist, but how do they actually benefit from that investment of a tech company and a developer coming into their community. And some communities are going to be a good fit for that and some aren't. So really having an open conversation and an inclusive table around which all different players can sit. Some of that is also making sure that the roadmap itself is really seen as a framework. This is not something where people can, look at this and then say, oh, this is what we do in our community. It's the key things that we need to contend with. It's the topics that we need to bring to bear. And we think that right now the tools are simply not there or not readily available for local decision makers. This is part of what is a real call to action to make sure that we do have those tools, those resources, so that people are making good decisions for their communities. So as we consider energy needs, as we consider water, all these different considerations, these are things that both present challenges and opportunities. And we're just going to get better solutions if we have spaces to bring everybody around the table.
This is certainly the economic issue of the day, so we really appreciate you joining us to talk about the roadmap and where we go from here. Abby, thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Great. We will be back with a discussion about the state budget with AP reporter Marc Levy right after this.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by Cross-State Credit Union Association. Credit unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, visit crossstate.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Association of Pennsylvania State College and University Faculties, representing the faculty and coaches who are devoted to providing quality public higher education for Pennsylvania's college students.
Welcome back to Pennsylvania Newsmakers. I'm delighted to welcome back to Newsmakers Marc Levy, the longtime Associated Press reporter out of Harrisburg State Capitol. Good to have you.
Thanks for having me.
What the heck is going on at our Capitol? We are approaching 3 months now of an impasse in our budget, and it doesn't seem like things are really moving much at all. What's the latest you're hearing?
So, the parties involved keep the information very close to their chest. It's very hard to get a good idea of what exactly is going on. For an extended period, it had to do with Republicans wanting the spend number to come down. They were concerned about depleting the reserves and running a deficit in the near future. As far as we can tell, Democrats have brought that spend figure down, but now there are fights around the margins about which school districts will get how much money and some concessions on Medicaid. Republicans want to be sure that the future increases in Medicaid spending won't bankrupt the state or won't, send it into deficit territory in the near future. We're not talking about huge dollar figures. We're not talking about huge fights, but everyone involved with budget negotiations always says, the first 95% of disagreements are easy stuff. The last 1% is the hardest part. So it's been very quiet about the precise details. That's the best information I have.
So it used to be that June 30th was the deadline. So obviously we've blown past that. Is there another sort of lesser known deadline that's approaching as far as when organizations will start to be impacted, school districts by lack of funding? Is there like another maybe silent deadline that might drive them back to the table?
I wouldn't say there's one deadline. I would say there's a series of days in which the pain grows, right? So everyone can weather it through July. But as August starts to wear on, the poorest counties and the poorest school districts start to feel the pain. As September starts to roll on, the smallest nonprofits that provide social services may not be getting paid. They have to start to lay off people. They're borrowing money. Counties that have a little bit more money and school districts that have a little bit more money are depleting their reserves. People at the smallest social services agencies might be getting laid off, or they might be leaving because they're not getting paid. And so as October begins, counties are warning that the pain will become more severe. And the one thing in talking to county commissioners the other day that they said is that there is real damage being done to the social safety net right now, in that you have caseworkers and social workers, people who are highly trained and hard to retain and hard to find, are leaving their jobs because they're not getting paid or they're being laid off. And finding a replacement for that person is hard to do. Training them is hard to do. The other sort of silent damage that's happening is when school districts and counties are using their reserves because they're not getting paid by the state, they're losing their investment income on that. So they are losing money even as they use their reserves to plug a hole.
So we have about 30 seconds before we have to go to break, but is there a political price to be paid by the administration or the leaders in the House or Senate at some point? What's the political play here, and who stands to really be blamed or perceived to be blamed here?
It's a great question. I'm not certain I've seen a political fallout from past stalemates. Pennsylvania stands out among all states for its budget stalemate. So this is by no means the longest. But of the longest, I'm not certain that there has been political fallout, but this is now becoming a political issue in the upcoming race for governor in next year's election between Democratic Governor Josh Shapiro and his Republican would-be challenger, Stacey Garrity, who's endorsed by the party.
All right, well, we'll pick up that conversation with Marc Levy right after this break.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Medical Society. Inspired physicians committed to the good health of Pennsylvanians and the advancement of the practice of medicine. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by Pennsylvania American Water. We keep life flowing across the Keystone State.
Continuing our conversation with longtime AP reporter Marc Levy. Marc, there's one of the, I think, highest profile elections coming up in November that most Pennsylvanians probably don't even know about, and that's the retention of 3 Democratic Pennsylvania Supreme Court justices. And so while it's not getting a lot of play necessarily amongst voters, it's certainly getting a lot of attention outside of Pennsylvania. Can you tell us why?
Right. So this is an extremely important court in basically the nation's premier presidential battleground state, right? So next year there's not a presidential race, but there is a race for governor, and there are 4 contested seats, at least seats that Democrats would like to take away from Republicans in Congress. And Congress is so narrowly divided that every seat is of great value. So to the extent that the state Supreme Court settles a lot of conflicts over election law, this fall's election could be pivotal in how the court rules next year on matters of election law and matters around next year's election. And this is, it's sort of a quirky election in that you have them running for retention, so for another 10-year term on the court, but they don't have an opponent. In fact, the ballot doesn't even show their party. So people go, they vote, they see this name on the ballot, and they don't have a lot of information about it typically because these are such low-profile races, right? It's been more than 20 years since there's been a serious challenge to a state Supreme Court justice running for retention. And with the court balanced 5-2 right now, the state Supreme Court, 5 Democrats, 2 Republicans, if 3 Democrats lose their seats, we will go into next year with the state Supreme Court tied at 2-2.
So are Pennsylvanians likely to start seeing a lot of mailers showing up in their mailboxes? Are we going to see TV ads pop up, a lot of money coming in from outside of Pennsylvania to support those efforts to either retain or dismiss these justices?
Yes. So if you are a super voter or a pretty reliable voter, in other words, you vote in every election, you're probably, and you're registered, you're probably getting things in your mailbox telling you which way to vote. You may have seen a TV ad in Philadelphia for one side or the other. Republicans are starting to spend millions of dollars in this, what looks like millions of dollars. Not all the spending has been disclosed. But for context, the state Supreme Court race in Wisconsin in April cost more than $100 million. More than $100 million. The record in the state Supreme Court race in Pennsylvania is somewhere north of around $23 million. That was 2023 when you had a head-to-head race. So this race is now in the millions of dollars. It's hard to tell how high it will go. If you're airing a TV ad around the state, it's about $1 million a week. So we have 6 weeks, give or take, until the election. You know, if both sides are running millions of dollars of TV ads, we could eclipse the $23 million threshold. We won't hit $100 million.
Incredible, incredible. Before I let you go, I want to hit you on one last thing. The Shapiro administration this past week decided to issue some guidance on vaccinations, feeling there was some confusion from the federal level from a recent meeting of the Centers for Disease Control. Why do you think the Departments of Health and Insurance felt compelled to communicate to Pennsylvanians about this issue?
So this is something that about 25 states have done. They have all issued new guidance, something that a few of them have ever done, and it's in the wake of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, its vaccine advisory panel, stepping back from certain positions it's had on, say, MMR vaccines for young children and COVID-19 vaccines. And so states primarily led by Democratic governors have stepped forward and said, we want doctors to have the best advice, and we want insurers to cover these things. And so we are going to point you to certain organizations that we think are providing better advice than the CDC at this time. And some of those organizations are medical professionals, organizations of medical professionals that are also sort of public health organizations like the American Association of Pediatrics. And so that's what these states are doing, is saying, don't get your advice from the federal government, get it from these organizations of medical professionals.
Got it. So it sounds like it's both the health department, the insurance department. I know the Pennsylvania Pharmacy Board issued some language on it. It's certainly timely, given that I think a lot of Pennsylvanians right now are considering, getting shots for the flu, COVID boosters, and things like that.
Exactly.
So it's this conversation between state governments and the federal government. Some of that advice, I imagine that conversation will continue.
Right. Yes. And there's a clear divide between Republican states and Democratic states on whether they're going to follow the federal government's positions on these.
Great. Marc, thanks as always for joining us. Much appreciated. That's going to end this week's edition of Pennsylvania Newsmakers. Thanks so much for joining us. Take care.